desire to understand how the world works. And I really love to read, which turned into writing. And so I have written a lot. And in this video series, I am going to break down my 5th thesis paper, which is essentially everything I've ever learned and am deeply passionate about. I poured my heart and soul into this thesis. And when I say everything I learned, I do mean absolutely everything, including art school and grad school and law school, and then, of course, the courses I took for this LLM. An LLM, by the way, is just a 1-year legal degree that you typically do outside of the country where you earned your law degree, so you can get a different perspective. I would tell you what it stands for, but it's Latin, so, who speaks Latin anymore? Anyway, as a lawyer, you might be surprised that the most important thing I learned was something my mom told me when I was like 3 or 4. And it's that nothing is more important than coming from a place of empathy and kindness and care. It's essentially with those priorities that we can listen and learn from each other and collaborate, work towards common goals, and essentially create a better future for all life. Now, thankfully, I'm not alone in this endeavor. There have been countless scholars and community leaders, Indigenous people, and others from all walks of life who have been rallying together for social change in regards to care since before I was born. And with that in mind, I'm going to say that all of us in all of our fields, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so I'm going to start this video series from a deep place of gratitude for all of the famous and unsung heroes throughout history and today. So you might be wondering why I, as a lawyer, am so into caring and kindness. Well, I started this thesis paper trying to understand why international law is not sustainable and how we can work with what exists to quickly improve humanity's relationship with the planet and specifically the ocean, because I'm an ocean person. And naturally, this led me to the origins of international law. Can you guess what that is? It's the C word. Colonization. So obviously, colonization is not a discrete event in history, or maybe not so obviously. A lot of people think of it as this event that happened a long, long time ago, hundreds of years. But the effects are still felt today, and many people are still living under colonial rule today. So it's just not really called that anymore. And there's a bunch of other different kinds of colonization you can research if you want, like economic colonization and eco-colonization. But that's for another video. So let's think about the formation of international law. The colonizers were the ones in power, and so they wrote the law. And accepted international law today is what they created. So, international law embodies the morals and values of colonizers, and it maintains the power dynamics from colonial era. Now, of course, the colonizers did not include the values and worldviews of the people they colonized, right? So, perspectives of how human beings interact with the world were restricted solely to the separation of humans and nature, as if somehow we're not naturally occurring, but go figure. So somehow there's a separation between civilization and nature is something for humans to use. And it's a one-way street, right? It's exploitation of nature. So there's no room for reciprocal relationships in this worldview between humans and nature, or gratitude or empathy for other living things that are not human. And today we can see the results of international law, right? The destruction of the earth, which turn on the news and there it is, it's perfectly legal. You just need to get a permit, right? And you can have an environmental impact assessment at the domestic level or international level. And all that assessment really does is judge how much environmental destruction is acceptable, sometimes based on profit. And then the overarching principles in international environmental law, like do no harm, they still kind of just assume that people are going to harm the environment. And again, that emphasizes that we're separate from it somehow and we're not interconnected or dependent. And the thought of having a mutually beneficial relationship with the environment is like nowhere in that realm. So let's look at a quick example I used in my thesis of the continued influence of colonization on current international law and how that oppresses the environment and people, because we're all the same thing. Okay, so in Africa, the fishing communities of present-day Ghana and Togo and other countries on the western coast, they lived in harmony with the ocean since like forever. The ocean was their deity. They loved the ocean. They grew up swimming and fishing, and they had ceremonies based on the ocean. But colonial rule came about and discredited traditional fishing knowledge, and colonizers viewed the local people as harmful to the environment. It's extremely common around the world for colonizers to project tragedy of the commons upon whatever people are indigenous to that place. So this essentially what happened was the colonial rule, even after these countries became independent, they inherited the laws of the colonizers. And not only that, but more recently, there was a Harvard professor who published his preliminary findings in a blog post where he laid out blame for the reduction in fish population and fish catches on these traditional fishing villages for having a population increase and adding like outboard motors to their canoes. But he didn't explore any of the larger problems, like foreign fishing fleets with flags of convenience, or how current laws in the area, still doing the tragedy of the commons projection, are placing all the environmental conservation efforts on these artisanal fishers and nearly none on huge fishing industries. And he essentially ignored the fishers telling him that some of the industrial Chinese fishing vessels are literally removing their nets. So this is an example of implicit bias, right? It's a hangover from the colonial era. But thankfully, there was another Harvard professor who published a paper describing the relationships between West African fishing communities and the ocean. It is one of respect and balance, and there's a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of nature and human existence. And when there was not colonial rule, these people and the ocean flourished side by side because the relationship was considered reciprocal. And not reciprocal like an eye for an eye, but like a gift is bestowed upon you, and so you bestow a new gift. So here we are today, right? International law, not great. Now, of course, international environmental law has tried to right the ship, but really in a half-hearted manner. And that's because it has yet to escape its specific worldview. And so when the drafters of new international law put the word sustainable in front of other words like development and use, it didn't actually solve any environmental problems because we weren't thinking about what sustainable actually means, or what it could mean, or what it should mean. So, and the law really does not elaborate on what sustainable means that much. Most definitions are based on the 1987 Brundtland Report, also called Our Common Future. And as you can see, it's rather vague and focuses solely on human needs. You know, the word environment, habitat, nature, earth, none of that is present. If anything, this definition of sustainable is purely economic. There's no reference to cultural heritage or values. It's just basic, we need to meet our needs without harming the future generations' ability to meet their needs. Now, this isn't strictly bad on its own. And international law, of course, is supposed to be a little bit vague and provide a framework, or guidance, because it does need to be applied around the world. But given the global context of this definition, it really hasn't gone far enough, right? We're facing a climate crisis fueled by biodiversity loss. So, how can we move forward? There are many paths. There's the rights of nature movement, there's indigenous guardianship, there's human rights litigation based on a healthy environment being a prerequisite to enjoying your human rights. There's a lot, and I'm thrilled that they're all doing a thing. We need everyone to do the thing. So one path that I'm really interested in is also recognizing that other worldviews, like indigenous legalities, have just as much merit as accepted international law. And this idea led my thesis down the road of a grunt norm. What is a grunt norm? It's a German word, and it basically means like the golden principle. Like, this is the gold standard that we use when laws are in conflict. How do we decide what law should prevail or what action is legal when laws are in conflict? And essentially, it's what is the main goal of these laws? But herein lies the challenge. When you have so many different worldviews and legalities, you also have a clash of goals for each set of laws. My way around this is to recognize that the law is the codification of society's morals and values. So I looked through a bunch of societies and cultures around the world to see if I could find a baseline, like a global grunt norm that kind of already exists, right? It's just basic enough that all human beings need it and can agree. And I came up with care. It's been argued that the very fabric of society is held together by care, which, if you just think about it logically, makes a lot of sense, right? Human beings are interdependent. We rely on each other for basic needs like food and shelter and emotional support. And it's acts of care, like caring for family and friends, that create and foster trust and cooperation in a society. And it makes larger systems like healthcare and education possible. I mean, without enough trust to cooperate, we would never do bigger things like infrastructure, roads, the internet. It wouldn't happen, right? And the trust is built on us caring for each other. Now, of course, care has been undercut by what I'll call modern society by devaluing the emotional labor required to care. This includes listening, empathizing, and comforting others. These are the things that hold families, friends, and communities together. And communities with strong relationships based on care, they tend to be more stable, and in times of crisis, they are much more resilient. And that's what we're in right now. We're in a global crisis. So, when I saw care across the world as a fundamental principle for having a healthy, happy society, and as a requirement for any culture to live in harmony with nature, I was kind of flabbergasted, I guess. I was really excited. And, you know, in Western societies, it's often called an ethic of care, and Indigenous societies, it takes the form of like responsibility and gratitude-based reciprocity, which was what I mentioned earlier about a gift is bestowed to you, so you also give a gift, right? That kind of reciprocity. But now I realized the biggest challenge of my thesis would be answering the question of how do we teach law to care? And I will answer that in part 2 of explaining my thesis. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.